if you started in the cable business, potentially that means, carriage fees, and it's a different world out there in free streaming. How do you make sure that you cater to both ecosystem, without cannibalizing one another in terms of revenues, etc.? But maybe a bit more on that later. Michael, do you want to tell us a bit more about how you saw and took part in that transformation within either USA or your previous experiences with Ashling Digital?
Sure. I think, Marion, you really bring up an extraordinarily important issue. In the waning days of digital cable, the question of bandwidth came up again. We don't have the channel space. Moving from analog to digital originally was supposed to bring infinite space for channels and choice. But then media consolidation, of course, 6 companies owned all 2,000 channels essentially in the digital universe. And I think what consumers want is they want choice. What Travis mentioned about the ability to Bloomberg's, at least during my time at Bloomberg, it sounds from what Travis indicated is very, very similar. It's not a streaming company. It's not a radio company. It's a financial news and information company. Once they figure out there's a new pathway to deliver that to the audience, it's not a question of if, but of when and how. And I think for many companies who are making that evolution, it's very, very important to first determine what resources do we have internally, both content and human in nature. And then, what contractually are we permitted to do? Are we bound by MFN clauses? Do we have the bandwidth? If we're paying license fees to get on platforms, or we're generating it from platforms, how can we reallocate those resources to reach a greater audience and monetize more effectively? And thankfully, there are a lot of organizations that, companies like Whirl and Amagi and Aspera, all of these companies that can contribute to the process. I think it's up to the individual content owners to really determine which ones they have in-house, which ones they need to pursue or license, and then keeping them in a corral, controlling them so that your own brand doesn't get away from your control.
Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but the channel you operate, it's an OTA over-the-air channel and a digital or a streaming channel, correct?
Yes.
So how does that work? How much can you, make happen together? What requires, bespoke expertise, skills, etc.?
So from a content and programming perspective, you're exactly right. It is a ubiquitous stream, both over the air and streaming. And from a programming perspective, that's a real advantage in that all of our resources, thinking, effort, and creativity are on our program grid, which we have, I think, a real advantage in being able, without the shackles of MFNs, to be the same for all audiences. That allows us to offer any audience, no matter how they encounter us, the same consistent brand experience across platforms. That said, that getting there did require investment. I mentioned when we first launched on streaming in 2014, it was a wheel. And that wheel was rather repetitive, right? Because it was a series of pre-produced assets. And so with the resources we had within sort of the P&L that was our reality at the time, we spun up live programming, but it was a bit of a mix of live, wheel, pre-produced shows. And we knew we needed to get to a more comprehensively live strategy. I had this experience in my own household, watching my husband turn on live cable news, and I said, "Why aren't you watching us?" And he said, "Honey, I never know when you guys are live. I don't know if you're, are you guys live right now? And
Mm.
it started this, we have got to invest in a fully live strategy so that sort of as use of or viewership on streaming and fast platforms grew, so did consumer expectation of quality and sort of seamlessness of experience between streaming and sort of traditional television. But make no mistake, it took investment, and frankly, when we launched over the air in 2021, it was in part the margins possible on traditional television that funded that investment to grow that that live capacity for both audiences.
So talking about programming, Marion,